doing well and that your work is going good so far this semester. I know that we're in week 4. It moves quickly in the summer, you know that. So we had a few students that were added late, and a couple of you had trouble with the text, but now that I think we're all on board and we're ready, I hope that you already caught up with everything that you need to catch up with. I thought I would add a video today of I hope that will bridge the gap, give you an overview of kind of what we're doing here with this study and the problem of evil and suffering. I chose to do this outdoors because it was a pretty day to do it, and I'm actually at a surgery center waiting for my dad to finish surgery. And thought it would be an appropriate time to probably talk with you about the problem of suffering. Suffering is a real thing that happens in all of our lives. There's no escaping it. And I know we're studying it in an academic, intellectual way to look at the issue itself. And the title of the course, the problems of suffering and evil. First part of the semester, we're looking at suffering. Second part, we'll look at the problem of evil. But what do you do with suffering? And where does it come from? What's its source? After all, if you believe in the mystery of a creator, of God, then what do you make of this? I don't know about you. I was taught early in my life, God is good, God is great. But how do you square a triangle? And by that I mean, if you look at the problem of theodicy, the problem of suffering and evil, look at it this way. One angle, human suffering. Without a doubt, that's a reality. Another angle, God's benevolence, His goodness. Another angle, God's omnipotence, God's power. How do you take those 3 points that form that triangle and square it to make it make sense, to help you understand the way the world works, the way life works? And are there things that we can do to avoid suffering? Well, the answer to that, of course, is yes, there are some things that we can do in a preventive way of trying to help ourselves. There are things that we can do actually that will diminish the suffering of others as well. And yet, even if we were to do all of those things for ourselves and others, you know as well as I do, there's still unanswered issues concerning suffering. Suffering still comes into our life, into our experience with life. How do you deal with that? What do you make of that? In the year 1755, it was November the 1st, it was about 9:40 in the morning in Lisbon, Portugal. The churches were full. It was a Sunday. It was All Saints' Day, a high and holy day of worship. And by all accounts, the churches were packed on that day. And at 9:40, an earthquake occurred out on the ocean floor of the North Atlantic and sent shock waves across the city of Lisbon, causing houses and churches to crumble and fall. Walls fell on people. Many people were killed on that morning. As a matter of fact, you can read about it. You can go and research this and look at it. The thing that's for us and for our study is certainly an earthquake is a serious event that can cause a lot of suffering in life. You know that as well as I do. The thing this particular earthquake did, it shook not only the foundation of the city, it shook the foundation of a theological world. A world that, quite honestly, a worldview where people thought they sort of had this figured out. They kind of knew the way in which God operated in the world. At least in their mind, they had that idea. And somehow this earthquake shook their theological convictions to the core. It crumbled so many of the things that they had held on to and believed. For instance, the idea that if you do the right thing, God rewards that, and if you do the wrong thing, you get punished for it. Well, these were people on the whole who were already in church trying to do the right thing. Many of them died. Many of them that survived suffered in terrible ways because of the earthquake. What happened? Why did it happen? Did God cause it? Did God allow it? I mean, after all, they thought they had their world figured out. The earthquake destroyed those kind of narratives for their understanding. As a matter of fact, weeks, even months later, Catholic priests went to their pulpits declaring that it was, after all, the will of God, that God was doing this on purpose. Protestant preachers took their pulpit and said, yes, indeed, God did this on purpose. It was God's will, but God was punishing everyone because of the Catholics. So you had the Catholics and the Protestants blaming each other, or suggesting that it was each other's fault, that God caused this to happen. As a matter of fact, that's why I chose the book Candide for you to read as part of the course, because Voltaire the philosopher, had decided that he would retire, that he was done with philosophy. And when that happened in Lisbon with the earthquake, and he began to hear religious people make those kind of arguments against each other, suggesting that God was the cause of this, Voltaire had had enough, and he rose up and he wrote Candide. He did it in a very brief time. You can see that in the preface and the introduction of that little text. So what do you make of this? What do you make of the suffering that people go through? What do you make of tragedy when it comes into life? Where does it come from? How do you make sense of it? The problem of theodicy, right? Theodicy, the problem of suffering and evil, trying to find answers. Now, here's the thing. I think you know this already. There are no easy answers. Yes, we are studying, in many ways, both a theological and a philosophical issue. It's deep. And there are volumes written along this line. And as a matter of fact, I hope that you will have time personally to dig deeper instead of just the text that I've offered for the semester, because these really are texts that just sort of get us to wade into the topic of theodicy. But there are so many things, so many good things that are written about this issue. Now, here's the thing. I personally don't think you're ever going to ultimately be able to square that triangle I was telling you about. Doesn't mean you don't try. It doesn't mean you don't try to find understanding or better insight into this issue. But it's just not as simple as some people make it out to be. Let's be honest. Some people, especially in the religious world, would suggest that that the Bible itself contains the answer. Now, does the Bible answer the problem of suffering? Well, on the one hand, it does. But it doesn't offer one answer. It offers many different answers. And so it makes an attempt to answer. For instance, what Bart Ehrman calls the classical view of suffering from the Hebrew prophets, it works off of a principle of divine retribution. You do the right thing, you get rewarded for it. You do the wrong thing, you get punished for it. And that's called divine retribution. And many people hold that viewpoint. I know people even today who will hold that viewpoint. And it may work well for you until suffering comes into your life. But that's not the only answer. Don't let anyone ever tell you that there's one answer to this issue. There's not, according to the Bible. There are a lot of different viewpoints. The redemptive view of suffering that Ehrman mentions, and then of course trying to make sense of suffering out of the book of Job and other wisdom books of the Bible, and then the apocalyptic view of suffering. All of those are legitimate views that come from the Bible itself. But the Bible itself doesn't offer one consistent viewpoint on this issue. That same thing would be true in other faith traditions as well. And certainly when you begin to research and study this issue, you'll discover that with others who have written about the issue itself. And so I would suggest to us in our study that we recognize and acknowledge the reality of suffering. I don't think I have to convince any of you that, but you have to begin to think about ways in which to approach this issue. It is interesting that even in our time, if a natural disaster occurs, a tornado, for instance, that comes across the area, or a flood, you hear even insurance companies at times talking about that as an act of God. Well, is it really? Is that the way it works? That everything that happens either happens by the hand of God or by the will of God? If God doesn't cause it, does God simply allow it? And what does that say about God being good or benevolent? And so this semester, in the weeks ahead, we will be looking at that particular issue. We've already started. You know we have. And there are strengths and weaknesses to every viewpoint that we're going to look at as we go. As a matter of fact, as we move along in the next few weeks, we're going to dive deeply into the book of Job. I'll take you into the book of Ecclesiastes, the ancient wisdom that offers an alternative viewpoint. For instance, if you were to take the prophets and hold on to that view, and they believed, obviously, for Israel, that if Israel did the right thing by honoring the covenant that God had created with them, that God would honor that and reward them. If they disobeyed that, they suffered, either at the hand of God or they were allowed to enter into a season of suffering brought on by someone else. You have that viewpoint, and then you contrast that with the writer of Ecclesiastes, Koheleth, who suggests that the battle doesn't always go to the strong, the race doesn't always go to the swift, and time and chance happen to us all. That's an alternative viewpoint. I mean, what do you do with that? So what I'm suggesting is that the Bible itself offers many different perspectives on the issue. It's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it gives us a chance to reflect and to dig deeper and to try and understand. And so, this semester, do the reading, stay current. I know you are. It's not that much of it. But go ahead and really dig into Candide. I want you to do that because I want to hold a class discussion, maybe on Zoom. I also want to create some other Zoom discussions with you this semester, so we'll have a chance to sort of connect as a class, get to know one another, and then I'll be doing discussion questions. I will also be doing some things with as we go that will maybe give some insight and help into even the work you're doing on your paper. I'd like to create and we can do this with technology. I'd like for you to be able to make a presentation of your paper near the end of the semester as well, maybe 10, 15 minutes. I'll talk with you a little later about that. Well, enough for now. Take care of yourself. I hope this has been helpful. Hey, if nothing else, what I wanted to do is get you to start thinking with me in more of a theological, philosophical way, to really think about this in a deeper way. And I hope that you will find time to really dive deeply into this topic and that it will be helpful to you. Take care.